From Poe to Thoreau, there's more to poetry than timing and rhyming. Tonight, connect with two local poets who have honed their creative craft and can help you do the same. Tamra Higgins and Mary Jane Dickerson of Sundog Poetry in Jericho are also the brains behind the statewide Poets in Their Craft lecture series. Mary Jane Dickerson, Tamra Higgins, thank you both so much for joining us tonight. First question, Sundog Poetry. Where does that name come from?
Tamra answers that.
Well, actually, when I thought about starting a poetry center, it was a time when I was really enamored with sundogs, the natural phenomena that appears in the sky. And my first thought was to call it the more scientific name, perihelion. And fortunately, I had a very good friend who said, don't do that, don't do that.
You want people to be able to pronounce
exactly,
it, right?
and remember it. And so I went with the more common name, Sundog. And I think that they really reflect the sun, and that's what we try to do at Sundog Poetry. Reflect light and reflect giving back to the community in a literary way.
Beautiful, and from what I've seen, you are certainly staying true to your mission. How long have you ladies been doing this?
Well, Tamra started, of course, before she asked me to join her. And I think you had Sundog for
only about 6 months.
Yes. And then she came to a poetry workshop that I was doing in April of 2013.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know at the time, and when she asked me after that and to do this, here she came to my poetry workshop, and she was the president of the Vermont Poetry Society.
Wow.
And has an MFA. So, I mean, I wondered why was she coming to my poetry workshop. But
I can answer that in a moment.
Yeah, certainly.
It's sort of like having another daughter.
Wonderful.
Which I am very pleased to have. And not long after Tamra asked me, I was driving along the river road in Jericho, and I saw my first sundog.
Really? So talk
So I
about
thought
an
that was
omen,
a good,
right?
sign, a good sign.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you ladies are bonded by your gift or what, but it seems like you've been friends forever.
Well, we were just chatting about that a little bit ago, and we only have known each other for 2 years, but it feels like much, much longer.
Yeah.
And I think our personalities click. I think our, we're very serious about poetry, of course, and about teaching, and we have a lot in common. And we've had a lot of people tell us that they are surprised and impressed at our synergy.
Certainly.
Yeah.
And to be able to share your talents with so many people throughout the state, it's been remarkable for you to be on this journey so far from what it seems. But this is sort of a second career of sorts for both of you ladies. You are both educators, so I'm sure you've inspired plenty of young minds to put the pen to paper and create their own poetry. If you'd be so kind, just go ahead and tell us a little bit about your time as educators.
I was at UVM in the English department from 1966 until 2000.
Wow.
And during that time, I taught a little bit of everything.
Sure.
Sort of whatever needed to be taught, I got to teach. But as a result, I got to develop wonderful, wonderful courses. And I'm indebted to the University of Vermont and the English department for always letting me develop courses that I wanted to teach, especially African American literature and various women's literature, such as women's autobiography and American autobiography. I taught an introduction to creative writing on occasion, but I never taught specific poetry courses, although there was always poetry, large chunks of poetry in any of the literature classes that I taught that lent itself to that. And I love my teaching and my students.
Well, you have to, and this must truly be a love of yours, because now that you are retired from academia, you are still so passionate about poetry, and you are still teaching. you know, not directly in the classroom, but through your series, which we'll talk about in a little bit as well, and also a camp that you ladies both recently just put together. Tamra, let's talk a little bit about your time in the classroom.
I have taught in the Vermont public schools for 19 years, and I started at the elementary level. And then I had the opportunity to teach middle school English and applied for that job and taught at Lamoille Union Middle School for 12 years. 10 of that was as an English teacher and 2 was as a literacy specialist for the entire school. So, and at that point I went back and got my MFA and really wanted to concentrate on poetry. And I've come full circle. This fall I'll actually be teaching at a local elementary school, and I've been promised to be able to infuse as much poetry as possible into the curriculum.
Excellent.
So, yeah,
Good.
Yeah.
And that was another question that I had. Do you feel as though poetry is still a staple in the curriculum throughout Vermont, throughout our country for that matter?
Absolutely. And I think in a way more so than it was, say, even 20 years ago. I think more young people are more, and I think the schools are more involved, and through the spoken word, and I just think that poetry has sort of, and you know, poet laureates like Billy Collins and others have sort of brought it out of the strictly academic, the strictly intellectual, and I think poetry is an intellectual pursuit, I really do. But at the same time, I think it's, and of course, African American culture and hip hop, I mean, that's poetry too.
Absolutely.
I mean, there are more forms of poetry, I think, and there's just more venues for the poetic in this country.
And I would agree with that, and the poetry has really gained accessibility through the internet, and that's really opened it up for young people too, who can access it in a way that they can be excited about. So I do see, when I was teaching, I did see a wide range of poetry being incorporated into classrooms. But what I saw in Vermont, what I've seen in Vermont is it's everywhere, and kids are excited about it, and teachers are excited about it too.
It is everywhere, and to speak to that point, Poetry Out Loud, a hugely successful program, which Vermont PBS, we are actually a partner on. You're looking at some of that video right now, folks at home. There are over 5,000 Vermont students who participate in this from over 40 schools around our area. So again, you talked a little bit about how social media and the internet has really played a part in this. It's that instant gratification. You know, you can put it out there and people can respond to your work immediately. They can say whether they love it, they loathe it, whatever the case may be. So I think that has to be a very powerful tool for these young poets, established poets as well, to get that direct feedback immediately. So again, speaking to the younger audience again, you have a camp that just recently wrapped up. Let's talk a little bit about how that came to be, and take us through a day in the life of one of your young poets, if you will.
Okay, we offered our first summer poetry camp, and it was based on nature poetry, and that was important because we offered it where Sundog is headquartered, which is on 46 acres in Jeffersonville. And we recently purchased a yurt, and so we ran the class, I ran the class in the yurt, and then we were able to use the fields, the pond, kayak, canoe. I actually have sheep, and we made fleece-covered journals out of their wool. So we had a lot of hands-on nature activities, but it always, during those activities, we always came back to writing and reading poems. And so the day started out actually with me sharing a poem, and we would discuss it, and you know, it would just open up. The students would, in that first hour, then start reading their own, or they would bring their own poems to share, and then we really got outside and either walked the nature trails or did other activities. And then we brought it full circle working on the journals, and
Wow.
and so it was really important to have it hands-on. It was really important to make poetry a natural part of your everyday experience.
And what an
And they had a book to take away.
Yes,
with
and
them.
they
wonderful
had,
to
yeah,
walk away
yes.
with such a tool
Right,
to show mom and dad and your
Right,
friends
right.
what you've done, and
Right.
talk about an inspiring setting. My
yeah.
goodness. Was nature tied into it a
Oh
lot?
yes,
Yes.
yes,
Okay.
yes. So the example poems were a different aspect of nature every day. And I just want to mention that on August 8th, the students will showcase their work at the Festival of the Arts in Jeffersonville.
Excellent.
So they'll have a chance to show off what they did and share their experience.
And
Yeah,
that's remarkable for them to gain such exposure, not only from you, but to the craft,
Right.
and to be able to open up. And now, here's a question. This leads me to another question. Is it performing? Is it reciting? Is it memorizing? What do you do when you showcase your poem? What's the difference there? Because for someone behind the scenes, they may say, oh, I went to a poetry reciting, or someone spoke poetry. What is the appropriate way of saying what you do so eloquently?
Yeah. Do you want-
I'm not sure.
Makes three of us, right?
I think there is a difference between a reading and, for example, a poetry slam,
Yeah,
which is
yes,
more
which is-
performance-based.
Sure.
Yeah, there are
And, yeah.
differences. And I think the performance-based does appeal to younger people more.
Right.
You know, the thought of Robert Frost at a poetry slam doesn't, you know, work.
Doesn't jive, right?
No. But I think having that kind of more relaxed atmosphere
Excellent.
is helpful there.
Yeah.
But I think I know poets who, even some in Vermont, who recite their work by heart,
Wow.
and which is, I think, very effective.
Right.
I can't do that.
No.
Right. And I would say it's almost a continuum, a reading, a recital that we see at Poetry Out Loud maybe, and then the performance. And it's a continuum of how you feel most comfortable sharing your work.
Sure. Absolutely.
So-
So moving forward, now this is from your website, and we did speak about this a little bit. Your mission is to promote poetry as necessary to the enrichment of our cultural lives, support poets in their work, and create audiences for their poetry, and provide ways to share poetry throughout the Vermont community. How do you do it?
Well, you write a mission statement
There you go.
that says you've got to get to work, first of all.
Hold you accountable, right?
Yes. But I think, in a way, doing that then led to the kind of thinking that was our brainstorming that led us to come up with the, first of all, the poet series.
Sure.
And I think one thing that I rely on Tamra so much for, she's the better half of my brain. I think we
wouldn't
work,
say
we
that.
stimulate each other
We do.
with our ideas, so that we can talk and we can think
Right.
together, think out loud, and come up with ways. And Tamra began Sundog Poetry Center by sponsoring readings. You talk about what you first, what was the first thing?
The very first thing we did was poetry, music, and delectable delights, and we brought poets, musicians, and together at an art gallery in Jeffersonville, and made sure there was really good food there.
Sure.
Poetry doesn't always attract people, if you just bill it as poetry, but music and food definitely do. And so that was really our first foray into the community. And then we decided to have a retreat, a poetry retreat, which we did at Fielder Farm in
Huntington
Thank
Center.
you, Huntington Center.
Beautiful.
And those were really the first activities we did. And from there, we added on camps, the additional teen retreat. We're going to have a healing through poetry retreat. We were publishing some books with Green Writers Press. And we partnered with River Arts in Morrisville to hold a publishers fair. So those are kind of become our anchor activities or events. So, yeah, we bring that mission to life through readings, events, workshops, retreats.
Which brings us beautifully to our next point right here. You have been busy. You're about halfway through the series, Poets and Their Craft. Our crews have been filming this series around the state, and we actually have a clip that we're going to roll right now. So let's take a look.
I come from a family of storytellers. I mean, that's why I've written basically 3 collections of poetry that are novels and poems. And you have to start at the beginning, first poem, and read it through to the end. And there's an arc that connects all of those separate poems together. So that's sort of something that comes naturally, is telling a poem. Telling a narrative, that's pretty easy. And then the difficulty is exactly where do you start to make it the best and the shortest, because you don't want to bore your readers.
There is something about a death of a family member that requires us to take hold of it, to sort of fix it in some kind of way so that we can carry it with us and go on from that. And the poem is the way I go about that. So Rachel, will you start?
The phone woke her, and she knew instantly, Mother said. A nurse said he seemed to be, there is no word.
That suits what was happening to him in those early mornings. And I don't know what they said.
Really seemed to be dying.
Everything has changed, though nothing has. They've changed the locks on almost every door, and windows have been bolted, just in case. It's business as usual, someone says. Is anybody left to mind the store? Everything has changed, though nothing has.
So for the folks at home, that was an exclusive look. You've been busy, we've been busy, you've been all over the state with this. We actually have a graphic of the geographical layout of exactly where, there it is up on the screen now, and you certainly haven't shied away from any areas of the state. You ladies will actually be performing at Phoenix Books in Burlington next week on the 6th, August 6th that will be. How do the poets at home get involved in this sort of reading? Is it open to the public? Can anyone come? It seems pretty interactive there. We had someone in the audience reading from the book, so if you're shy, maybe stay home, but if you're really proud of poetry, come on out to this event. How does it all work?
Well, I think the personalities and individuality of each poet contributes to what happens at each event, and their feel for the community, because they're from all over the state too, and so I think that has been an important feature. But we want, people to come, and actually I think we've enjoyed the audiences almost as much as the poets who are speaking, because the questions have been good, and you didn't show him, but the first person who asked David Huddle a question was a boy of about 8.
Wow.
Who asked him, why did he write about death? And
Wow.
So we like that people ask the questions and are not afraid to say what they're thinking about. And there's no question that is not a good question. All questions are good.
And all the lectures are free and open to the public, and that is hugely due to a generous grant that we got from the Vermont Humanities Council.
Very nice.
And you don't have to ask questions if you come. You can just enjoy the poetry and enjoy learning something about poetry. It was really important for us to have a dialogue and not just have the poet behind the lectern inaccessible. And there aren't a lot of public forum where you can have that conversation about poetry and pick a poet's brain about what he or she thinks.
Very nice. You ladies have been kind enough to bring in some of your published work, which we're going to get to in a minute. But before we go there, where does poetry come from? Is it the heart? Is it the mind? Is it the universe? Is it an experience that you've lived?
All of the above.
Excellent.
I would say, yeah, for sure. Yeah.
For me, some things come out of even unresolved things in my own life, and reflections on what I've lived through and my own experiences, but also with regard to an audience and to others and what their experiences might be. So, and I think I have lots of books in my house, and I always, even with the internet, that I could look up this poem or that poem by Yeats or Wordsworth or Ellen Bryant Voigt. I still like having their books, the book in my hand as well, to read and think about, so that I couldn't live without it, without the reading of it and the appreciation of it, and more writing has become very essential to me too.
So let's move into it.
Yeah.
We're going to put you on the spot right now, Mary Jane. We're going to have you start with one of your readings and take it away.
Well, it's hard to think of what to read.
Oh, I can
you
only
know,
imagine,
but,
especially on the spot, right?
Since I'll read actually one of my first poems that ever got published.
Excellent, thank you.
And now it's in this book, but it's called My Inheritance. My inheritance is the pool of blood in memory. There, the rising moan of longleaf pines swaying in winter wind. Pans of crackling bread, their aromas steaming from an oven door. Anna's black skin, moist and beautiful, while she balances a wooden flat of dewberries on the plane of her turbaned head. The magnolia leaves, their patterns moving black and white over the moonlit wall, bearing me toward sleep, toward dream. In my body move the rhythms of all these and more. On Sunday afternoon rides, my father pulls the green Ford to a dusty stop alongside the edges of fields that stretch far into haze, the waves of heat. There I hold out my palms to receive the slender stalks of grain, brittle and top-heavy, with clusters of rye, barley, oats, and wheat. Their nut-like tastes, the shapes of their ripening heads, the earth sounds their names made on my lips. These I learned, these rhythms moving in my body's words. Always I will see berries staked in curving rows, my mouth stained purple the month of June. Bright leaf tobacco wilting in late afternoon heat. Cotton fields swelling, white under September sun. Their growth toward ripeness, my season as well, that harvest mine. Through the years now, through distances I have placed between us, that land recedes, but still I am pulled southward always, toward red clay, toward gray sandy loam crumbling and falling, through fingers, my grandfather's and yours, my father, until I too reach out through years and miles and cup my hands to receive the soil, the land, grain by grain, into my own blood beating, falling, warm. In my body move these rhythms. In my mouth these words move, failing like my blood, Father, Father. In my flesh, in my heartbeat, the soil of home.
Wow, take a minute, breathe that in. Fine line between poetry and painting. What an image you just created for us. Mary Jane, thank you so much. Tamra, you've also agreed to share a reading, but we are going to have that as a web exclusive. So
Okay.
they're going to have to go to the website to see what you have brought in to share for us. In a word or two, what do most well-written poems have in common?
They move you emotionally, and even if you don't necessarily understand it, there should be a sense of a difference in your emotional state when you're finished with them. One other thing I'd like to mention is that Frost said a poem begins in delight and ends in wisdom, and so a poem really should take you on a journey to someplace new.
Wow. And ladies, thank you so very much both for being here. Mary Jane Dickerson, Tamra Higgins, and thanks to you at home for watching as well. We want to connect with you and keep the conversation going. You can always reach out with feedback and ideas at connect@vermontpbs.org and get caught up on extra episodes and more material at vermontpbs.org. See you next time.